What is going on, everybody out there? This is Jakejames Lugo. Welcome to the channel and welcome to this brand new JJ's One Man Podcast. Hopefully, all of you are doing all right. We're about 10 days out before Christmas. The holidays are in full swing for everybody, whether you celebrate Christmas, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, whatever have you. Hopefully, you and yours are doing all right for the holiday season, especially for us gamers out here. There's a lot of games to play right now, a lot of stuff that are going on the Christmas list, which is pretty good. But for this podcast, we got a lot of stuff to get into. A few housekeeping things to get out of the way first before we dive into a lot of the topics, because some of these are pretty heavy-handed. First things first, make sure you leave a like on this episode of the podcast. Make sure you leave a comment down below in the comment section. And make sure also that you subscribe to the channel. Show some love, because I've been putting out a lot of great content that I know many of you are going to love, but some of you are not getting it. Some of you are not seeing it. You got to check it out. I have a brand new preview for a brand new game coming out next year, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. I literally just put out a video as of yesterday before I'm recording this podcast, where I actually earlier on, I want to say a couple weeks ago, got to actually preview Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown and play the game for about 3 or so hours with Ubisoft. And I did a whole video showing gameplay, giving my thoughts and impressions of the game. That's up right now. So if you haven't seen it yet, go check it out, because it's pretty cool. I had a lot of things to say about that game. It's coming out in January 2024. I want to say about middle of January, give or take, but it's going to be on multiple platforms, and I got to play it early. So if you guys love stuff like that, let me know. Tell me in the comment section of that video. Like the video, check it out, and just give me some of your feedback. Besides that, also, a couple things to address or bring up that some people have brought up here and there. Some people have wanted to see this podcast in video form, with me actually on camera talking on the actual podcast, and I'm hit or miss with it, because there's a couple reasons why I do this with audio, especially in comparison to just doing with video, because a lot of people have been doing video podcasts. They want to see people on camera, and I get that. That's all cool. The problem is, though, is that sometimes when I record these video podcasts, either it's not convenient at the time frame, especially if it's like super early in the morning, or I just, again, if I get like a spurge of ideas or like an inspiration to talk about something, usually I'm like in my pajamas and I'm just sitting here just like on the mic going at it, and it's not the best sight, to be honest with you, which is kind of goofy. But another thing to kind of compromise with that until I actually decide to do video podcasts for this actual podcast, I've been doing live streams on TikTok. So every once in a while, I'll go live on TikTok and have a whole discussion with everybody on there. So if you want to actually see more live podcasts and video form kind of like that, you got those live streams that I actually do on TikTok, which is fun. I enjoy that. Again, it gives us an opportunity to talk one-on-one with everybody watching on the actual stream in the chat. I could talk questions, gaming, movies, all types of stuff with all of you. So if you haven't already followed me on TikTok, make sure that you do so, because whenever I decide to go live, I tell everybody on there and on my other social media, and I just go at it. I'm there for like an hour or two, and we're just having a ball, just talking about stuff. Besides that, too, a couple other things to address. That's actually coming up this weekend on Saturday from when I'm recording this podcast, so it might date this podcast a little bit. I'm actually going to be going to the Otaku Fest holiday event that's happening in South Florida. It's a day event that's all about, again, gaming, anime, and everything else, but all holiday themed, which should be a lot of fun. It's being run by the same people who do Otaku Fest down here in South Florida. It's just, as opposed to like a multi-day event, it's just a one-day event. So it's kind of like along the lines for anybody in Florida that's gone to like Holiday Matsuri, but just imagine that for South Florida. So that should be a lot of fun. I'm going to be going there, hanging out with everybody. I had a lot of fun at the Flynn's Jingle Jamboree that they had, I think it was last weekend or the weekend before, and it was really cool, you know, getting to see everybody, getting to talk games. You know, everybody's in the holiday, you know, atmosphere and the holiday cheer. So it should be the same thing, but just in this area. So if you're within the area and you want to go check out a holiday event, make sure you go visit the Otaku Fest holiday event, and it should be a lot of fun. And come say hi if you see me out there roaming around. So now that we got all the housekeeping out of the way, okay, we talked a little bit about new content coming. We talked a little bit about events. Let's talk about some actual news stuff that people have been discussing. Let's start off with the smallest things first, because we got two other big things I want to get into, but let's talk a little bit more about the Game Awards. If you haven't already, go check out my episode of this podcast where I talked about all the winners and my post thoughts about the Game Awards themselves. But that's not what I'm going to talk about here. What I am going to talk about is I'm going to talk about some of the post-controversy and like some of the chatter that came up afterwards about the Game Awards. Because if you remember, we've talked about the Game Awards 2023 multiple times now. Before the actual award show, there was a couple thoughts and like chatter going around about the Game Awards addressing some of the big issues in the news and like some of the statements that people wanted to see them make, which I understand. I did a whole discussion about this in one of my previous episodes. And I said, if you remember, if you listened to it, if you haven't, go check it out. But if you did, one of the things that I said in there is that while I understand the need for some people to see the Game Awards really address some of these bigger issues. And what I mean by issues, I'm talking about some of the things in the news about Israel and Palestine. Another thing that people brought up was about the layoffs this year that are happening in the games industry in all different sectors, a lot of different places. A lot of people were really upset that the Game Awards didn't make some sort of statement or really address anything related to that. And there was a couple other things here and there, but those were like the two big things that I saw people really bouncing back and forth. It ended up being during the show that the Game Awards didn't tackle any of that. They never made any sort of statement. Jeff didn't do any sort of monologue about that. You didn't see any of the winners addressing stuff like that. But also in the wake of the show, we did see some people that were upset about some of the things that were on stage. Number one, Christopher Judge that was catching heat for a joke that he did on stage when he came out to, I think it was to present best voice acting or best performance in a game. That ended up going to, the actor from Baldur's Gate 3 who played Astarion, which well-deservedly so. I already gave my opinions about the actual award winners, but people were pissed off at him because of the joke that he made about Call of Duty. Specifically, the Call of Duty devs were pretty mad on social media. To me, that was a big nothing burger for a lot of people. Now, I understand not everybody's going to take a joke funny. Not everybody's going to be really happy about whatever jokes, especially if it's about you. I thought from what I saw on that stage from Christopher Judge, he was doing a rib, which was just like a lighthearted joke. And it's a kind of thing like just poking fun at Call of Duty this year, Modern Warfare 3 specifically, where the campaign wasn't that long. So it was a little innocent joke, I felt like. At this point, when I saw the reaction and some of the responses from some of the Call of Duty developers, from specifically, I believe it was from Sledgehammer, if not just Activision in general, I felt that they took that a little bit too hard. It felt like a little bit that they didn't just have tough enough skin, like they had very thin skin when it came to this joke, because it really wasn't that bad. He made a joke about how the Call of Duty campaign, his speech at the Game Awards last year was longer than that campaign. That's a really inane, almost like a stupid joke, a really innocent jab. And it's just kind of like, how are you going to be that upset about that? Some of the reasoning that I saw from some of these developers that they were saying was like, oh, we don't expect this type of thing from our peers. We don't expect this thing to be done at the Game Awards. It's like, come on now. Don't you think you're being just a little bit too much, just being a little bit too hard-headed here? I get it. You don't like the idea that the joke was about you and your game. I get that. But come on now. I think a lot of other people, especially if it wasn't Christopher Judge, if they did a joke like that, nobody would be complaining this much, or nobody would be making a big deal about this. A lot of people, especially gamers, especially a lot of content creators, and a few other media people I saw were kind of poking fun at the fact that the developers that were so vocal and so upset about it, they were just not taking the joke. They just took it a little bit too hard and made it much more of a bigger deal than what it is. There was one dev that I saw that made some sort of statement, and I wish I had it in front of me because it's been deleted since, where I think he was talking about how again, I'm not saying it verbatim, but it was something along the lines of how the player retention isn't as good for God of War Ragnarok compared to Call of Duty. And people were pointing out to him before he deleted it was like, yo, listen, God of War Ragnarok is a single player game. It's just, common practice that people, when it first comes out, are going to play it. It's going to be a lot of people on that game, really engaging with it. And then it's going to drop off once everybody finishes it. It's not the same thing as a multiplayer game where there's going to be player retention over time. And games like that, games like Call of Duty, games like Overwatch, games like Fortnite, games like Apex Legends, these style of games depend on player retention. So they live and die by that. So they constantly need to have new content and new reasons for players to come back and continue playing that game online and engaging with it. It's two very different things going on with games. So it's a little unfair and a little bit weird to make that comparison or think that that's a gotcha moment for the Call of Duty devs. It's just really weird to say that. And again, this was all over a really dumb joke that made no real impact. It really wasn't that big of a deal. And they just needed to line up just a little bit. I don't think Christopher Judge did anything that terrible. I think that maybe, if anything, come next year, I think he's probably going to do another joke. Because if I know Christopher Judge, he has a real goofy sense of humor. And I would not be surprised if it comes up in conversation again next year. But regardless, though, that was that. Now, going back to the other thing too that I mentioned about the stuff in the news that the Game Awards didn't tackle, the big thing obviously that happened right before the show was that big open letter from the Game Awards Future Class. By the way, I'm still a little bit salty that I wasn't chosen for the Future Class this year, but that's regardless. I come to accept it. It is what it is. Hopefully, fingers crossed next year. I'm being like funny, by the way, so relax. I'm not taking it too seriously. But the thing was is that they had this open letter about how they wanted the games industry, or the Game Awards specifically, to address the ongoing issue that was going on between Israel and Palestine. And of course, if you watch the show, that did not happen. A lot of people had many different thoughts. I did see a lot of developers and a lot of different industry people, mostly PR people, that kept having opinions about it, kept saying that, oh, they didn't address this. And also, again, I mentioned too before about the layoffs in the industry. The Game Awards didn't address any of these things. Jeff didn't talk about this stuff. It was really at the show more focused on the awards and the show itself. Now, my opinion about all this is again, like I said before, I get why people are upset about this for whatever reason. You have a right to be upset. You have a right to your opinion. But like I said during those other podcasts, is that the Game Awards were going to do what works for the Game Awards. They were going to focus on the show. They were going to do what was best for the show. And I think that between Jeff and whoever else was running the event itself, along with his team and stuff, that production team in general, I think they felt it was best just to keep it focused on the awards and just the games themselves. And regardless about that small vocal minority of people that were upset about it, I think the majority of people that watched the show, from the reactions that I saw, because I'm looking at social media reactions, I'm looking at YouTube videos and other posts that are shared around, that many people didn't care that they didn't address any of these things. And I think that for the show, regardless of how you feel about the issues themselves, but for the show, it was probably the best thing to do and probably the best course of action, because there was obviously a lot of chatter about the different awards. The thing that did stick out to me, though, about the reactions, specifically with some of the winners, was the actual how much, the show just kept pushing people out. They kept trying to make sure that people weren't spending a lot of time with their acceptance speeches. And many people were upset about what happened to Larian Studios when they were talking about one of the developers that passed away during that time. I don't necessarily think that was Jeff's call to kind of shoo them off, give them only a minute, because I think he has to deal with a lot of other issues when it comes to time management with the show. Keep in mind, last year, Christopher Judge was up there for 8 to 10 minutes, just talking and rambling on. So I think that caused a little bit of a ruckus behind the scenes as far as how the show is managed and how the show plays out production-wise. And maybe there has to deal with something involving maybe sponsorships or other production things that we just don't know about, that we're not privy to, because obviously Jeff would know more about that than anybody else, where time and getting people off the stage at a reasonable time frame, or maybe even, they probably beforehand told all the people that were being, nominated and stuff, look, you're only going to have this amount of time and we have to shoo you off. And maybe they just had to be a little bit firm about it. I don't know. I think that it is fair to say that maybe they should have given Larian Studios, all the people that went up there to accept for Game of the Year, maybe a little bit more time, especially when they were getting a little bit heavy-handed with what they were talking about. Because again, they did win Game of the Year. So I could totally understand giving them an extra 30 to 45 seconds, maybe another minute or so. That I think would have been acceptable. But keep in mind, I feel like we don't have all the information of what it's like to really manage that show and really run the Game Awards. I feel like maybe, again, when Jeff Keighley comes on and talks a little bit more about it, because you know how he is. He likes to talk with everybody when he does those live streams. And I'm pretty sure there are probably people that have asked him at some point about what was up with that. Why was it that developers and all the award winners were shooed off? They only had 45 seconds to a minute to get off the stage with the music. Because let's be honest too, that music is obnoxious. That music can be a little bit weird to hear when you're watching the stream, where they're kind of just okay, wrap it up, son, wrap it up. It's like the Chappelle skit that people have mentioned. So I totally get it, but I feel like there's more reasoning to it other than them just trying to be obnoxious to the winners. I don't think that's really the case. I don't think that there was any malicious intent with that. But who knows? Maybe next year things will be a little bit different. Maybe they'll give everybody a minute 45 or 2 minutes to actually talk and try to build it around that. But who knows at this point? We'll see what happens. Let me know your thoughts about all this stuff down below in the comment section. How do you guys feel about everything that I talked about with the Game Awards post-show, with all the stuff that came out about controversy or news with it? Do you think that next year with the Game Awards that Jeff maybe might do things a little bit differently? Maybe he will have a monologue at the beginning. Maybe he will give more time to the winners to speak. Maybe there'll be a little bit more shifting around with some of the awards and what has more time than others. Talk to me about that down below in the comment section. And don't forget to leave a like on the episode if you guys can. Show some love. So let's get into the big thing that happened this week, like as of a day or so ago, man, because this is pretty wild, right? Let's talk about the shutting down permanently of E3. Okay, so E3, if you didn't already see the news, if you didn't see any of my posts about it, because I talked about it a few times, both on Twitter and also on TikTok, that E3 officially is being canceled permanently. Ever since the awards, or not the awards, but ever since the show was announced to be canceled in 2023 and 2024, which was like maybe, I want to say like a couple months ago, we knew this was coming. But overall, this makes it official from the ESA saying that E3 is done. Now, I do have the statement that they have posted up on their Twitter, which was shared around everywhere. Again, if you haven't seen this, I'm going to tell it to you right now. And you could also see my actual response to them afterwards. But on the official E3 page on Twitter and also on their Instagram and other places, they also put out a press release. They came out and said that after more than 2 decades of E3, each one bigger than the last, the time has come to say goodbye. Thanks for the memories. And then they put GGWP, which means good game, well played. And that's from the ESA, the Entertainment Software Association, about E3. And this hit everybody hard because, again, we all knew this was coming. We all knew this was going to happen at some point. But it hits differently and it feels different when you actually see it go down. Like, you're never really truly prepared for something like this, I feel like. And the reason being is because we all love E3. Myself, I loved E3. Again, I went to 6 E3 shows. Now, I know in some of my previous posts I said 5, but I did the math and I looked at all my passes because I did a picture of all my badges that I got at E3. It's actually 6 shows that I went to, right? So give me my extra show. Make sure I don't cheat myself out. I'm lowballing myself, but give me my extra show. It was 6 E3s that I went to as media and got to cover, which was awesome. I got to see E3 at its height and E3 at its decline. And the crazy thing is that a lot of people felt very emotional about this. You know, they were sharing stuff online, you know, different E3 memories, some of their favorite moments from E3, some of their favorite personal moments if they ended up going to the show as media and covering it for various outlets and stuff, like what was going down when they were there at the show. There was a lot of people that had many different opinions about this. And it comes down to a few things, okay? Because there were some reports that came out after this announcement that were talking about and speaking to different people about what happened with E3 and why we got to this point that we're at now. I saw a posting on IGN. I saw a posting on the Washington Post. There was stuff on gamesindustry.biz and many other spots. But basically, it comes down to mismanagement. It comes down to the exact same thing I've been saying for a long time now, that E3 as a show, the ESA, the Entertainment Software Association, did not know what they wanted E3 to be, which is a damn shame because E3 was the biggest show in the games industry, in gaming, in entertainment when it comes to video games. Like, there was no bigger show as far as importance and relevance as E3. You could argue we had shows like Comic-Con, we had shows like CES, we had all these other different events, expos, and conventions and stuff. But the problem was that everybody tuned into E3. I grew up watching E3 shows on G4 TV. Like, that was a thing. I used to watch G4 TV's coverage of E3 every year that they would go, until eventually I was able to go myself, which was awesome. I still remember my first E3 show. It was in 2014. I got to go see so many great things and be around so many great people. It was the first time I met Jeff Keighley. It was the first time I met Adam Sessler. I met Marcus Beer. I met all the people that I've been talking to online at various different places and outlets and websites. I had seen things in person, the Nintendo booth, the PlayStation booth that were huge, the Xbox booth as well, which, by the way, I've even told this story that for multiple years, up to the point where I think PlayStation left, there used to be this little section of E3 when you're walking through the aisles and through the different halls called the Great Divide, which was literally one side of the aisle was PlayStation and the other side was Xbox. And it made this like corridor where you had these 2 giant walls with the logos of both games. And then Nintendo was in another corner. But I used to call this the Great Divide because it was like literally a great divide, a pathway where you could go one side or the other. It was kind of like an inside joke amongst all of us. You know, I have great memories of E3 like that. But getting back to what I was saying of why we got to this point, it all comes down to mismanagement. You know, there were statements by different people out on the ESA and also by people from Repop that were saying like, look, you know, they really didn't have a good idea of what direction they wanted to go. We had ideas and like, you know, pitches for what we could do because they were trying so hard to be everything all at the same time and never really chose one specific path. I mean, they were a trade show that was for industry people, that was literally for industry folks like devs, like executives, like media. That's how E3 really was for a long time. And then they opened up to the public, which to me, I thought was the worst idea, because I understand the need to compete and to keep up with a lot of these other shows. But a lot of people that were at E3 for years did not go to E3 for that. If they wanted to get that Comic-Con experience, they would go to Comic-Con. If they wanted to get that PAX East or PAX West type of experience, they would go to the PAX shows or go to anything involving like New York Comic-Con or whatever else. You know, in the industry show was supposed to be an industry show. It was supposed to be for people that were part of the industry. And they tried to change that, and they tried to adapt with that in order to not only make more profit, to keep different people and different organizations coming and actually getting space at E3, but also they wanted the mass appeal. They wanted a lot of people to really kind of make it bigger than what it already was. And they went about it in like the worst way possible, in my opinion. I remember being at that first E3 where they let people in, you know, regular people that weren't media, weren't industry, weren't any of that stuff. And I told this infamous story that I almost got trampled at the front entrance of E3 because there were so many chaotic like people. And I remember that year and then the years that followed when they were letting more people in as just regular gamer badges, which is what you would pay to go into. That there were so many people that I couldn't get to my first appointment with Bandai Namco that I had to walk through the entire, I believe it was the South Hall. I'm pretty sure it was either the South Hall or the West Hall, but one of the halls where I had to walk all through this area, past IGN's booth, past GameStop's booth, past near Nintendo. I had to go all the way to Bandai Namco, and I could not reach it in time because there were so many people. I remember getting there, and the PR person that I had talked to for years, they were like, yeah, we understand. Like, look how chaotic this is. Like, it was like so compact. It was so like, you know, just like almost no moving room. Like it was like standing room only at a concert where you couldn't really fit all around. It was very difficult to get around. And that was the problem, because once that happened, all the industry people that don't want to deal with that, that have no patience and don't want to be like, you know, mobbed by all these crazy fans, started to pull out. Because obviously Nintendo stopped doing their press conference prior to me going to E3. But I remember when they decided to be like, you know what, we're not going to be there. And then PlayStation was like, yeah, we're not really going to be there. You know, and it was just a really weird atmosphere without having those big companies there. E3 used to be the spot where not only everybody would premiere their major games coming out for the next year or so, but it was also a major spot where you got to mingle with a lot of these executives and a lot of these developers in like a really cool setting. Now, granted, a lot of it was marketing. A lot of it was like really trying to butter up the media and the press. I get all that. That was part of the process. That's in every single industry. We see that in movies. We see that in sports. We see that on TV. Like, I mean, come on. A lot of people make a big deal of that, like it's some sort of egregious thing. But every single industry, you know, or every single part of entertainment always has some element of that going on. And the thing is that it was unique to games. I remember going to my first couple E3 like gatherings, my press conferences and the parties I used to go to. The parties were where you got to really network and really talk to people. I remember going to one for Bethesda. This is an infamous story I tell everybody. I remember going to the one for Bethesda that was in some shady part of town, and it just looked super suspect, where the waitresses were walking around in garter belts. And they were just like serving like different hors d'oeuvres and stuff. They were there. That's what does their job. And it was there to promote, I guess, some of the games at the time. But I remember this rollout taco stand being there just randomly for like no reason. But like it was there and it allowed people to kind of mingle. And it was there for people to kind of connect. And then that's how you would actually connect with certain people and PR individuals throughout the rest of the upcoming year. There was other times I remember going to PlayStation's after party after their press conference where they literally had a wall of donuts. I kid you not. I remember seeing this. I remember going to it with Hip Hop Gamer, with Red Infamy. I remember being there with a couple of my other colleagues and seeing this thing and being like, my God, it's a wall of donuts. Like, you just don't see stuff like that. It was ridiculous, but it was there, and it was part of, like, all this stuff that everybody got to enjoy as part of, like, the actual experience of being at E3. A lot of the people that paid for their regular badges, you know, as regular people, did not get to experience that, because if you didn't know, those regular badges, you didn't really get to see anything. You couldn't have any appointments. You couldn't get into the press conferences. You couldn't get any behind the scenes, behind closed doors, demos. You couldn't get none of that. You know, it made no sense to go to E3 as a regular person. You had to be there as media or industry to really experience what it was or what people got to see on TV on a much more intimate level. So I was fortunate enough to see all of that for 6 years, which was awesome. And I wish that despite a lot of the changes that have happened with me for going towards different outlets and trying to make a career in this industry, I wish E3 was still around, and it's a damn shame to see it go away. But things change. Time changes. Time moves on, I mean. And a lot of parts of the industry and a lot of parts of entertainment, a lot of parts in life just constantly change. And there's no way to stop that. There's no way to kind of like, curb that to the side. You either adapt with it and you change with the times, or you don't and you get left behind. And that's exactly what happened to E3. I feel like they tried to be a number of different things. They tried to do a couple stuff that just wasn't the right move. And look what happened. A lot of people like to throw in too that the stuff with Jeff Keighley, after Jeff Keighley left, that's when E3 was truly done, personally for me, because Jeff has gone to every single E3. As far as I know, I think he said it a few times. He's gone to every single E3 show that was named E3, and he was a big supporter. He was doing the YouTube live stuff at LA Live. He was doing all the different types of discussions. I remember seeing him walk around the floor. I went to demos where he was at. I remember seeing all this stuff. He was pro supporter of like E3 because he loves this industry a lot. And once he left, and he couldn't come to an agreement of what they wanted to do as far as the ESA was concerned, and he started doing Summer Games Fest, I feel like that's when it was over, because you started to see a lot of different companies move away from E3 and go actually involve themselves with Summer Game Fest or the Game Awards and other events like Comic-Con, etc., or obviously PlayStation Experience at one point and PAX. You start to see that shift. I felt like a lot of people trust Jeff and trust people like Jeff Keighley in various capacities. When they started seeing those people start to move away from it, it was truly over. It wasn't even that much seeing the big three like move away from E3. That was big in of itself, but I felt like it started even before all of that. And some of the places that were reporting on it did discuss elements of that, but I don't think a lot of people really took a hard look at that. I feel like that was when you really started to see the show decline. But regardless, though, it is what it is. Like some of the reactions, I'll even tell you some of them. Some of the people I saw on Twitter reacting to the post that the ESA shared. I mean, I saw, I saw the Cyberpunk 2077 account that was sharing some of their best moments. Obviously, the one with Keanu Reeves during the Xbox conference. I was in that audience. I remember seeing that, and the roof like just doing a backflip of everybody in that room, which was pretty funny. I saw a lot of content creators sharing some of their thoughts and images from when they were at E3, the Bethesda conference stuff and the shows that they had, Ubisoft. I'm seeing all these other ones. I'm seeing a lot of people share pictures from like the outside of like I think that's the South Hall. Like some of the people showing like the outside entrance of E3, which was, again, that was like the spot that everybody congregated at, besides the JW Marriott, which was the place that if you really wanted to catch people that were in the industry to mingle with them and get a couple of drinks, that was where you needed to go. That was always popping off, the JW Marriott. Like it was so much fun just seeing people there. I also did see a lot of people posting up how they never got to go and that they'll never get to go now, which I understand, but again, it's a time thing. Like it's a time sensitive thing. Like eventually at some point these things change and these things happen, and there's no way to kind of, unless the show comes back on again, like there's no way to actually relive that or enable people to actually have that opportunity, because not everybody's going to have that, but it is what it is. I'm like scrolling through some of the reactions now, people sharing GIFs. Oh, here's another one. I remember walking into Charles Martinet. If you guys know Charles Martinet, the voice of Mario, or the former voice of Mario. He's a Mario ambassador now. I remember seeing him for one of the first times roaming around the Nintendo booth as we were hanging out. It was me, it was Skyward Wing, and it was him. And we were just all looking at the Smash Brothers stuff. And he was just chill. Like he's always like really, really cool to hang out around with or just say hello to. But you would see things like that. The best one, and this will be the last one I share, and then we can move on. The best moment, or one of the biggest moments I remember, was my Hideo Kojima story. So there's 2 times I've ran into Hideo Kojima, or I've run into a Hideo Kojima story that is actually relevant to E3. The first time, I believe it was either my first or my second E3 show that I got to cover, where Hideo Kojima was walking around like a rock star. Like he looked like he had groupies of everybody in the industry. There was people following around him, trying to get him to sign copies of Metal Gear Solid on PlayStation. He was doing interviews. He went from like GameStop's booth to IGN's booth to the Konami booth. It was ridiculous, right? And I remember one of my colleagues in my former website went to the bathroom like alongside him, I guess, where they were in there at the same time. And there was this whole thing where he was like, he was so shocked that he got to pee next to Hideo Kojima. It sounds ridiculous, but this was a thing with him, right? It was like, oh my God, I got to stand next to Hideo Kojima while he was taking a piss. And we started clowning him for the entire trip. It was so funny. We were like, yo, so did he show you who was big boss? Did he lale lulelo or something stupid like that? But I remember it was so funny being around that because those were the type of stories. It's like, yo, I just went to the bathroom and took a piss next to Hideo Kojima. I was right next to gaming greatness in the bathroom. It's so ridiculous. It's so stupid. The other time I ran into Hideo Kojima, which I believe, was at E3, where he was actually, I believe, by the Death Stranding booth, where he was taking pictures, and this one girl that was working the booth was trying, I guess, to shoo people away or to try to direct people and get, super aggressive, she was in control of the booth. And I remember him being there, and she saw him, and she immediately changed her demeanor. She was in shock. She was like, oh my God, it's Hideo Kojima. And, he was just, incognito. It was really funny. He was definitely putting on the Metal Gear Solid Snake vibes by sneaking around with his camera, taking pictures of the big, Norman Reedus statue for Death Stranding. It was really funny. It was really, really goofy. But there are goofy moments like that. I've seen stuff with Reggie Fils-Aimé, with Shigeru Miyamoto, and many others. There was Koji Igarashi with his cowboy hat. There's many other stories, and I don't have enough time to tell all of them. But there's a lot of ridiculous ones out there that I could share sometime down the line. Okay, but let me know some of your thoughts about E3 shutting down permanently, being canceled, no more E3 shows. Pour one out for E3, rip E3, but share some of your thoughts and your opinions about E3, the Electronic Entertainment Expo, as a whole in the comment section down below. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Now, let me take a sip of this water and let's talk about the big other controversy that just keeps on going. It just keeps giving for some reason. It's ridiculous, man. So, let's talk about some of the stuff that's happened more so with the Completionists and this ongoing issue/controversy with the Open Hand Foundation. It's been a couple weeks now. It just keeps on going in one way or another. More statements, more things that get put out there, more reactions from people. If you didn't already know what was going on, as a quick summary, Gerard Khalil, the Completionist, had been pretty much put on blast by both two YouTubers, Carl Jobst and Mudahar from Some Ordinary Gamers, for basically just holding on to a bunch of charity money for the Open Hand Foundation and not donating it for years. And finally, recently, as of a week or so ago, he actually put out a statement about his response and what he was thinking about doing, what had happened and everything else. And ever since that came out, Mudahar from Some Ordinary Gamers actually put out his own response to that, pointing out more contradictions from that statement. There was a lot of things, and very soon, I want to say at the time I'm recording this podcast this weekend, Carl Jobst actually said he's going to put out his own video in response to it, which it feels like things are only going to get more crazier and worse in general for Gerard. But the point is that ever since these videos have been coming out, a lot of people have had many different opinions, even more so than they had before. All of this has not looked good. Like I said in my previous podcast episodes, this all looks really bad, and it's still one of the bigger stories related to YouTubers and content creators of this year. This is pretty darn big, and it's from a person that a lot of people wouldn't expect to get into this type of controversy, or at least along these lines. Now, the reason why I bring it up again, besides that stuff that I mentioned before, there was one more thing that came up that really kind of solidifies it for me, and I'm going to read it out to you guys. This is from the Friends Per Second podcast. If you didn't remember, this was the podcast that Gerard was a part of, that prior to this, they actually made a statement saying that while Gerard was figuring out all this stuff going on with the Open Hand Foundation, he wasn't going to be on the podcast until he figured it out. Well, here's an update for you that's come out ever since both Gerard's statement and also Mudahar's response to his statement came out. So they put out this tweet to their fans on their official Friends Per Second podcast Twitter. They said, "Hey users, we wanted to provide an update on Gerard's involvement with the podcast. The four of us met to talk about the ongoing situation, and during that conversation, Gerard offered to step down from the podcast. As a team, we agreed that that would be for the best. We want to thank Gerard for his contributions to the podcast, and we really do wish him well in the future. We won't be commenting any further on the situation going forward. The podcast will continue with our holiday special into 2024 with Ralph, Jake, and Lucy." So that's their statement. That's the stuff that got put out there, and there's definitely been some responses, a lot, to what they posted up, like hundreds, if not thousands of responses. So let's be real about this for a second, okay? Let's sit down for a second and be totally real. You might want to take an extra sip of your coffee or whatever it is you're drinking before we get into this, right? Let's be honest here. Gerard didn't offer to really step away from the podcast or to step down from the podcast. Let's be honest, okay? I think many of us can understand that they're trying to give him some dignity and trying to be cordial about it, but I don't believe this for a second. And the reason why I don't believe this for a second is because prior to this, okay, number one, Gerard never mentioned it in his response stuff. He never brought it up on any of his platforms. But also, this is very similar to what they said prior in their first addressing of this entire situation. I think that with all the extra information that has come out, I think that with the response that he put out and the response from fans and everything else, I think they went to him and was like, hey, listen, I think maybe you should step away because of this, and that. I think that's probably what happened. And they're doing the cordial, the professional, and the optic thing to do to give him a little bit of dignity while they separate from themselves from him. Because I think that all this stuff with the Open Hand Foundation and Gerard is very, very bad. It looks bad. Everybody's looking at this and they're all saying the exact same thing. This looks bad. Very, very bad. And I think that with the Friends Per Second podcast, and I think anybody else that involved themselves with Gerard will look at this and see the response and the reactions from people and just the general activity on social media that it's not looking good for him. That everything that he does or that he's involved with, this is going to come up. This is going to be the conversation. And I think for the Friends Per Second podcast, it makes sense for them to step away from whatever it is that he's doing and kind of separate themselves from them so they could focus on their own content. So it's not always the conversation about Gerard's controversy. Because his controversy, this whole thing with the Open Hand Foundation and the donations for the charity, has nothing to do with the Friends Per Second podcast. They made that very clear. And I even said on one of my previous podcast episodes that I felt bad for them because they're kind of caught up on this and they didn't do anything wrong. So it makes sense for them to do this. And I think, from some of the responses I saw on their posts, it was genuinely well received. I think this was the best move for them to do. But now we go back to Gerard with this whole thing with the Open Hand Foundation. And it's like, damn, man, I don't know what else can be said about this entire situation with him. I watched his response and I have my opinions and thoughts about this. And I did talk about them in the previous episode, but I watched his response and then I watched Mudahar's response, and we haven't seen Carl's yet. And it's like every time like certain things come up about this that he talks that now that he's finally talked about it, it feels like now more stuff comes up. It feels like now more things are pointed out that aren't on the up and up, or at least in the way that Gerard has said that they were supposed to be. Because I'm still caught up on the idea like, yo, it's taken you like 10 years to finally donate this money. And then after everything like this blows up, now you actually donate the money. And then what was really telling and was really damning, in my opinion, when Mudahar put out the video and actually has that audio clip of Gerard saying this, that exact same thing I just said, you have Gerard on record saying this, on top of other things as well. I mean, how can anybody look at that and be like, oh, like this is not that big of a deal? I think it really is. And I think also we haven't heard about it yet, but I would not be surprised if other companies, like, companies that were probably sponsoring Gerard for the Completionist videos, or that one video gamer, or other groups and companies that were working with him with the Open Hand Foundation have decided to pull out. I would not be surprised if that's the case. I know that in one of the previous things I saw of him with G4, believe it or not, when the whole G4 channel went down and got shut down, he even came out on a podcast. I believe it was the Nintendo podcast, where he was talking to that guy Beat 'em Ups. At least that's the guy's username, Beat 'em Ups. He was actually mentioning that after that thing happens with G4, a bunch of sponsors stopped working with him. And a bunch of companies that used to give him game codes because of what he was doing with that one video gamer and G4, they stopped sending him game codes and they stopped doing this stuff. Stop at least, trying to collaborate with him or give him access to play their games. What do you think is going to happen now? Or what do you think has probably happened at this point when this controversy came up? Because if I'm a business, right? If I'm some sort of game company looking to work with different various content creators or trying to sponsor some things like that, do I really think, or do we all think that a company is willing to be, open to working with them following this controversy, especially if they want a lot of the attention on their brand or whatever it is that they're doing, and all the conversation is going to be about this controversy? Do you really think that they want that? Like, real talk. Ask yourself that question, because I'm pretty sure he's asked himself that question. I'm pretty sure the Friends Per Second podcast members ask themselves that question, because the true answer is that I don't think that they do. And again, I would not be surprised if that's been a thing at some point following all these like comments and these videos coming out. And I think it's only going to get worse. And I think that this isn't the last time, like I said before, that we've heard about this stuff. I think there's going to be more. I think there's going to be extra stuff that probably pops up. I think we're probably going to see another statement from Gerard at some point, especially after he almost threatens to sue Carl and Mudahar. That was the thing that's how I interpreted at the very end of his statement, where he was saying that they're looking at different options for what's next, following all these videos, because he felt like him and his organization has been accused of fraud, has been accused of forgery, of all these other things. I watched all those videos and nothing came up about forgery, as far as I know. I mean, they did make a big deal at first about the whole not signing like the actual documents and stuff, but that's electronic. Like nobody made a big deal about that. But the stuff with fraud, I think that a lot of people are starting to look at all these things and look at all of Gerard's statements and look at all the different events he's been a part of and what he's put out there, including his call with Carl and Mudahar. Okay. And it's starting to feel a little bit more like things are starting to lean in a certain direction. And I don't think he's happy about it, understandably so. But I also think that maybe that was a little overzealous to make that statement, let alone some of the things that Mudahar pointed out were also contradictions. And I think that there's going to be even more when Carl puts out his video, to point out other stuff in response to what Gerard had put out on the Completionist channel. And I think also keep in mind too, I forgot to say this before, that the response to Gerard's video from fans, I'm not talking about Carl and Mudahar or companies and stuff. I'm talking about fans specifically. So viewers of the Completionist, people that have been following the situation, that response was not followed that wasn't received all that well. There were obviously his friends in the industry and in content creation stuff like YouTubers that were supporting him, which let's be honest here for a second. And I know this is an out-of-pocket thing to say. Some of the people that are like saying like, oh, I support you and all this stuff, some of y'all are full of nonsense. Real talk. Because if you're looking at some of these other people, bigger like channels that probably are outside of gaming, looking at this, at least people that have knowledge about like finances and stuff, and they're pointing out like, yo, some of this is not on the up and up. Some of this is not looking good from that response. How is it that you are just blindly just going to support someone? I get it. It's your friend. It's your buddy. It's your colleague. But some of this just feels very disingenuous and not actually being fair and honest with what's happening here or what we've actually seen. Because it's a little hard to defend Gerard when he came out and said the whole reason that he donated the money now, or that he was looking to donate the money immediately, was because of the pressure that Carl and Mudahar put on him and the Open Hand Foundation and the people within the Open Hand Foundation feeling that. It's very hard to defend that or think otherwise when he said that on record. It's like, come on, man. Like, come on now. Like, I get the apology. I get that people want to actually support a friend. I get that people want to support someone that they've been colleagues with, that they've worked with multiple times. But we got to call a spade a spade. We got to be honest about this. We got to be real. We got to be fair. And just some of the stuff, like, again, the viewers out there could see right through this stuff, could see right through some of the responses and everything else. It's like, look, this is bad. This is bad enough. And I think it's going to be very difficult for Gerard to recover from this, because I think it's going to keep on going throughout the rest of the year, into the end of the year. And I think it's going to go into 2024. The longer that this lingers around, I think the worse that it gets. I think he took a long time, obviously, to respond, at the request, or at least at the advice of his lawyers. Him and the Open Hand Foundation totally talked to some sort of legal team straight up with all the response that he had put out in that video. But even so, I think that's why it took such a long time. And I think that, again, it's still going to keep on going. I think there's going to be more. And it sucks to see that, but it is what it is. But let me know some of your thoughts about this stuff. All the extra info that's come out about Gerard, about the Open Hand Foundation, about Carl and Mudahar's videos, the stuff that's coming up very soon as well. Put all your thoughts about that stuff in the comment section down below. Do you think it's going to get worse? Do you think it's going to get better? Do you think like this really damaged Gerard's career? Especially with the statement from the Friends Per Second podcast. Talk to me about everything down below in the comment section. And yeah, that's pretty much what I got for you guys on this episode of the podcast. Another long one, another heavy-handed one, but some of this stuff still keeps happening. There's a lot of big things that have been going down, especially with the E3 news. The E3 news is sad to see, but expected. Still sad to see, though. But Either way, though, that's all I got for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. Make sure you leave a like on this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Definitely go check out some of the newer content I've been putting up on the channel, including my preview of Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown that I got to play with Ubisoft. Go check out some of the other videos I've been doing as well as also, too, the YouTube Shorts. There's a lot of YouTube Shorts that are related to gaming that you guys definitely need to check out. I've been putting out a lot of them. Nearly every single week, there's been stuff going up. Make sure you also follow me on TikTok because I've been uploading daily different TikTok videos related to games and movies. I just did a review of the Iron Claw that I got to see from A24. I talked a little bit about some news about Star Wars games that have been coming up, as well as other games that I wanted to discuss. A lot of fun conversations that are a little bit different than what we tackled on here. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. Make sure you follow me on Instagram. Follow me on Threads as well. I'm all over the place. And don't forget about the Patreon. That I have a whole bunch of content on there that's exclusive. If you join the Patreon for $1 a month, you get a ton of exclusive content that's right there ready for you to check out. So anyway, I will talk to all of you guys again very soon. Peace out and stay epic, everybody.